Welcome to Last Call with Jamion Christian. Our guest today, BriAnna Garza, former NAIA player at Baker University. Well, she helped lead her team to the Sweet 16 and was the HAAC Player of the Year while being named an All-American. She holds degrees in psychology and 2 master's degrees in science and sport and performance psychology, and the other in education of institutional design and human performance technology. She has outstanding social content on how to shoot better and how to be a better player. I've enjoyed following her stuff through the course of this year. I wanted to have a chance to share it with our audience and our guests. BriAnna, welcome to Last Call. How are you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had no idea that was going to be such a warm introduction. Yeah, I haven't heard about the hack in a really long time. So thanks for the plug.
No, I think it's huge. One of the things that's happened in our sport, a lot of times those who played are kind of being pushed out by those who sort of didn't play. So I think it's really important to emphasize the fact that you're a good player. I think that does matter. And I don't think that being a player and being a person who didn't play is a huge differentiator, but I do think it's important. When players look and say, hey, you're a great shooting coach and you were a great shooter. I think that matters. So I think emphasizing that is really important. You're saying you're in Sweden right now. How's your trip in Sweden, and what are some of the things you're doing there now?
Yeah, Sweden's been great. I'm here working with the 19U Swedish national team. We actually just wrapped up a couple of days ago. It was an incredible experience. It's funny. Everybody in Sweden is, and this is self-proclaimed, but everybody in Sweden here is quite awkward. So it was really fun to work with that team and kind of poke them and make them uncomfortable and make them interact with each other in a way that they hadn't yet. And that was what the coach, outside of the shooting stuff, the coach knew that I was going to come with the heat, with all of that. But that was the part that he said he really liked the most, was getting them to interact as teammates in a way that they hadn't before.
Yeah, no, it's, again, I love the stuff that you do. You have all these, when I look you up, you have all these degrees behind your name. Talk a little bit about how, as a hooper, as a person who studied psychology at a lot of different levels, as a person who studied shooting at an elite level, how do you intertwine all those to help teach people?
Yeah, I think the second master's degree was sort of an accident. That was not really my intention. It just, that was my liaison back into basketball. I thought I wanted to be a college basketball coach. And so I was a GA. And being a GA, that comes with being able to get a master's degree. And that was, so the instructional design piece, I think, was sort of a university thing for me. I didn't really intend on getting another degree, and it just so turned out that it was exactly the degree that I needed. I've always been really interested in sports psychology. From the very first time I heard about it, I was on a visit to Oregon State, and the assistant coach was leading us around and showing us all of the facilities, and he just mentioned sports psychology. And I remember perking up, not even understanding that was a thing. And I knew right away that's what I wanted to do. So ended up studying that after undergrad, and that was great. Got to work with some Division I teams on campus and just being a sports psych consultant for them. And then after that, I took a gap year because I'd been in college for 7 years after high school. And then went on and became the GA and to do the instructional design piece. And so I think tangibly, I weave it in the curriculum that I write for the camps that I run and the online courses that I build. My shooting curriculum is based on 4 pillars: mind, body, power, and accuracy. And the balance between all of them. The logo that you see actually is inside of Shootersxshoot, inside of the textbook or the flagship design, is actually 2 symbols for phi, the mathematical symbol for phi, which is representative of the golden ratio of balance. And so I've created my curriculum on that idea of the perfect balance between mind, body, power, and accuracy. And so that's kind of how I've woven all of that together.
Number one, you mentioned the merchandise. The merch is nice. I'm gonna definitely be purchasing some merchandise. I just love the design. And give that to me again. Mind, body,
Power and accuracy.
power, and accuracy. I want to dive a little bit into each one of these. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Let's start with the physical.
Yeah, I'm glad you started there because that's how the curriculum is designed. So we start with accuracy because I think it's, unless we're teaching tiny tots, that's a little bit different. If I'm teaching tiny tots, I tend to teach power first, to teach them how to understand their body physically, how to generate power, because they're inevitably going to have to adjust their form once they build up, once they get stronger and they have like shoulder muscles instead of just pushing with their chest muscles. So if it's an older group that has developed physically, then we start with accuracy. Accuracy is, can you shoot the ball in a straight line? Can we help you feel your body in a way that is conducive to shooting the ball straight? That's really what, in the simplest version, accuracy comes down to. From there, once we feel, okay, like they've got a handle on the mechanics that work for them, right? Not the ones that work for me or for you or for anybody else. That's, I think, the beauty in teaching shooting is that it's really a different puzzle for everybody. And so once we get them to where we're feeling that they're pretty accurate, we then move to power. We start stretching their range. We start really helping them understand how to generate power in a way that feels easy to them. Once we go from there, then we add movement. That's the body piece. So we add shooting off the move, shooting off the dribble. Really the first two layers, I really don't mess with anything off the dribble until they're both accurate and powerful off the catch. Because, as you probably know, as the successful coach you've been, no coach wants you shooting off the dribble if you can't shoot off the catch. So, once we move into the body, we also cover things like nutrition and sleep and balance, all of those things. And that's the physical pieces that we do first.
Yeah, let's hold there for a second. And then we'll kind of go into the mind stuff. But the power, I love your, watching your stuff. I loved your explanation of how you generate power from the catch, from your feet to the ball movement. Just dive a little bit into how you're creating power and the importance of it. You don't have to give all your secrets away, but I just thought the explanation of it was perfect in the sense that you can really see it, understand it, and then go out and achieve it. Yeah,
I think there's two ways to kind of visualize power. That one is, the exercise that you saw, the one that's kind of been going bananas on my social media of imagining you're standing and you have to hold your hands above your ears, but you have to keep them there and jump as high as you can. And then, you're not going to generate the force, like the ground force that you would be able to if you had the freedom to do what you want with your hands. When we look at high jumpers, when we look at broad jumpers, even when you look at anybody trying to jump high from 2 feet, we see them swing their arms backwards and then use their arms as a way that's physically generating their momentum upwards. And this also ties into shooting smoother. Newton's third law is, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if we tell shooters they must stop the ball at their chest, then they are forced then to generate power by moving the ball backwards to go forwards, which is a very difficult shot, one, to generate power with, and also a very difficult shot to repeat the same way over and over again. Whereas if we teach them to redirect the energy down, it doesn't have to be down super far, but if we teach them to redirect the energy down, then they can just shoot up or lift the ball up in a way that's conducive to them shooting with range.
And why did we start teaching shooting like from the chest and like no dip and, all these things? How'd that even happen? We've all heard it as hoopers, but how did that even become a thing?
Yeah, I think I don't actually know, to be honest with you, but I have a theory. And I think it's the idea that if you keep the ball higher, you're less likely to get blocked.
Okay.
Is what the the common misconception is, all of the comments, on that post specifically are, if you dip the ball down, I'm taking it from you. I'm pinning it every time. I'm like, well, interesting. Interesting that you say that. Like, tell me more. And yeah, so I get it. Like, why? Because if we're thinking commonsensically, yeah, like if we're shooting the ball, we don't want to bring it down because that could expose it, or like I get why that could be the commonsensical reaction. But it hinders us from something else. So I think that's one reason is not wanting to, the fear of being blocked. And another reason is that when shooting curriculum was being developed, obviously it was being developed for large men, and large men, and especially back, when basketball was, bumping and jumping before we had all this stretch of range shooting that we do now. They were very much shooting behind their head, as like the jump shot. That was the way to shoot for professional players, was bringing the ball up as high as you can, bringing your elbow up so it's almost touching your forehead, and then shooting from there. So that's why I think that common misconception still exists today, is because, it's old habits die hard.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at how long it takes basketball to sort of adjust these I don't want to say they're norms, but to adjust through the years to the times that we're in now.
Yeah.
Because it's quite hard to block someone who shoots from behind their head, right?
It is.
But it's also a really hard shot to repeat. And
totally.
Obviously you would say, I'm sure, maybe you would agree, the further you get out, the harder it is to control that. The accuracy of that becomes really hard. But if you're in close, if you're 15 feet in the basket, you might need to lean back some, and that gives you probably a little bit of ability to get it off.
Yeah, I think there's two pieces to that, because when you just mentioned shooting behind your head and it being difficult to block, I immediately thought of Luka. And Luka, on his step back, he does have this. Incredible. I would never teach somebody how to shoot like Luka. He's obviously, like, no hate to Luka. He's the best, in the game right now offensively. But he has a very difficult shot to repeat, and because he brings it so far behind his head, and his trajectory is more shallow, even though he brings it so far. But because he's back there, it's hard to get blocked. But Luka struggles at the free throw line when he gets closer at 15 feet because of that sense of form. And so, and there's some cases, like when we're talking about fadeaways, or in the things in the paint like that, then absolutely, like, being able to, and I think it's less about bringing it behind your head at that point, and more about lifting the ball higher, just having a higher lift point in the ball. So yeah, I don't know why that sustains. Probably the same reason why it took Galileo so long for everybody that the world was round.
Yeah. Well, and I think, a lot of times we're looking at shooting, we're talking about like Luka. Very few people have Luka's body type, have his strength level, have his core strength. I've practiced that way for X number of years. So many times, I have a normal body, most people do. You have a normal body. And so learning how to shoot for most people is probably a little more, there's normal stretches of being able to learn that. But if we're trying to emulate Patrick Ewing or Michael Jordan or some of these guys who just have some incredible physical abilities, you're gonna be off slightly because they just have an ability that we just don't have.
Totally. And kind of tying back to, like, why I think it's so hard for us to sometimes to move the ball forward in the way we teach, or what is acceptable for the masses in teaching methods, is I actually just learned this from Rob Fodor. Are you familiar with Rob?
Explain.
Rob Fodor he's the shooting coach for the Miami Heat. And he's like a world-renowned, arguably one of the best shooting coaches on the planet. And I was watching a podcast with him and Chris Oliver, and they were kind of talking about this same subject. And he made a reference to something called the central programming generator. And that's essentially the piece of our brain that says how you do something the first time is how you'll always do it. Where, like, that's like programmed into us. Like, this is why ideas are so hard to change, is because it used to be if you changed your ideas, if you changed the way you did things, like that was detrimental to your safety. And so that's kind of instilled in us as humans. And I think in understanding that, like that thing exists, it becomes then easier to say, okay, I'm holding on to this idea so ardently, because that's kind of how it was programmed to. So let me take a step back and see if I can let go of that.
Yeah. So I think the ability to program yourself to be curious is like obviously the counter to that.
Totally.
No, that's a really good point. I'll make sure I'll check that out. Chris does a great job with his podcast, and you know, man, he's one of the best. I've had a chance to be on there a few times, and I just really appreciate his gift for sharing. You know, so we talk about power, we talk about body. Let's get into the mind some, because I feel like this is a drastically underrated part of performance, not just shooting. And we've had a lot of different thought leaders onto the podcast. I'd love to talk to you just about the mental part of shooting and just ask you a bunch of questions from there.
Yeah. So I think shooting is thinking about a lot of things until you don't have to think about anything at all.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of research on internal versus external cues, and research would show external cues are eventually going to be superior to internal. I've had a lot of success with the shooters I've trained in helping them just find a feeling, or identifying a feeling for them, and like helping them, because if they can't feel something, then they can't augment it, right? They can't change it or work through it yet. And so that's where I start with athletes, is I step back and I watch them shoot. A great example is Emma Cannon. She's my WNBA client. When she came to me, I had watched her, all of her shots that she had taken in the league up till then. And then I stood back and said, okay, I'm going to measure you at all these different types of shots. And I just stood back and watched. And overwhelmingly, her shots were short. And just because I trained my eye up to this point, I could identify. I mean, she's a pro. Like her shot was, her shot was fine. I don't ever come into a session and I'm like, okay, this is the things we need to change. In fact, I always make it a point to say, like, I'm not trying to change your shot. We're just going to experiment with some things that I really think work for you, will work for you. And that's an element of psychological safety right then and there.
Yeah.
But with Emma specifically, she had this tiny little hitch at the top of her shot. She'd come up and it was just very, very subtle. She called it a glitch, like a 2K glitch. And, I was like, we have to work through that because your shots are all short. That's why. The rest of your shot looks great. Let's just see if we can wiggle around that. So what we did is we didn't even take it on a goal. We just had her stand and shoot on a line to see if she can get the ball to land on the line. And we just had her feel for that. And for the first, 30 reps that she took, she couldn't really feel it. And then we just kind of used different analogies, different ways for her to identify the feeling. And then the music happened and she says, I felt it.
Yeah.
That is like music to my ears when I hear an athlete say that. I'm like, all right, that's all we need. Really, that's all we need. Once you feel it, then now we can work through it. And so we spent the next 2 days working through that little glitch, and she was able to move around and even on a real shot say, okay, I felt that. And we would like reward. We would have a reward system. Just even when we were doing those line drops, I would give her 1 point if she shot smooth without that little glitch. I would give her 2 points if she shot smooth without that little glitch and it landed on the line. Yep. That's what we did over and over again. So that's a piece of just like practice scheduling and her being mentally locked into and internal in her body. That's one piece of the mind piece. And then there's, of course, kind of the body-mind connection with practice scheduling and adding variability and random, practice and block practice and how that shapes our mind and our skills in a way that's really on a subconscious level than anything else. And then like the meat and potatoes of like my favorite kind of mind exercise to do with athletes is I don't do this until I feel they're at a place physically with their shot that is very accurate, 70% or better at most levels of shooting. And I got this from the very first book on sports psychology I ever read was The Inner Game of Tennis by W. Timothy Galway. And he talked about like putting yourself in a place of emotion, making reps feel personal in a way that most athletes haven't experimented with before. So I'll have athletes in their reps say, I'll ask them before we kind of start, who is your most hated defender? Like who is somebody when they check into the game, you're like, like Pat Bev or something coming into the game, and you really don't want them to guard you. And I have them like identify that person by name. And through each rep, like we're very intentional about like reminding them, okay, I want you to feel how personal this is for you now, every time you score and every time you miss. Because I think we do a good job as coaches creating game-like environments, creating game speed reps, those sorts of things. But there's an emotional piece of psychology, of performance that I think we often get lost in.
Oh, I love it. Oh man, that's great. It's so many good parts there. The emotional part of it when you're working out, if you can go there, some athletes really struggle to be able to go there.
Totally.
And that's like really scary to me. The best athletes I've worked with can go there and go there pretty easily.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to figure out, like everybody, like what makes an elite player elite. And I know we tend to lean on the physical so much more. And I think it's so much more mental.
I agree. And, especially when we're talking, I work with a lot of young women, and the piece that I try to figure out as a coach of young women is how do we get their dog mentality to come out? Like East Coast basketball, like those girls are dogs. Like when I coach East Coast girls, like no problem. Like that's just a culture thing. But then I go to the West Coast or like even Florida on the East Coast, like they're like beach bums, they're being nice to each other. And so I think that's a piece of it. I think also the culture of coaching that they've likely been up against has something to do with that too. I think many of our athletes, even our elite athletes, have been coached to regulate their emotions in a way that becomes detrimental to their whole development, not just as a basketball player, but as a human, like letting themselves feel difficult emotions and being okay with responding to that in whatever way that they need to. Obviously during a game and stuff, like, we keep it moving, but I think athletes are taught emotions are bad. And so to even have to grab onto them during something like a workout can be really challenging.
Oh, you got my mind racing. We always had this thing in our program. We called it MEP, mental, emotional, and physical. And it was it's not a great theory, but it's like you have three brains working at the same time, all the time. Your mental brain, how you recover from things, your emotional brain, obviously the emotions like we're talking about, and then the physical, which we've talked about with creating power, accuracy, and they do those things. So I love how you see it. And I think in the culture of coaching from where you are in the path you're getting are also really underrated. And both sides of it have a good and a bad. I've seen it where athletes who maybe West Coast, let's say West Coast mentality, they can bounce back really quick from a loss. Like they just move on.
That is true.
Right. And so, that's a good thing in some ways, where the East Coast mentality, just as we're kind of using analogies, they might really struggle. Like they might come to practice 3 days later and still be holding on to it.
Right.
And so recognizing as a coach where your athletes are coming from and their foundation of not just, we talk about a foundation of learning a lot on here, but their foundation of emotion and competitiveness. God, that's really pivotal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting because we as coaches, like we teach athletes, like you have to regulate your emotions. You can't show emotion in games because that'll get you technicals or this or that. But coaches can flip.
Yeah.
On you, they can scream at you, they can flip tables like and freak out, but you can't. And like I think that right there, like if we could treat athletes like adults and hold coaches to that standard, like how can you expect your athletes to be emotionally regulated if we don't hold ourselves to that, if we don't model that, we don't hold ourselves to that standard. And we talk about psychological safety, like like that's just a huge piece, like a non-negotiable for me, is when I start any sort of session with a group of athletes, if it's going to be a week-long session, or even at the beginning of a 4-day intensive, like an individual thing that I do, is the very first thing I tell them is like, I will always give you truth with love, and I will never make you feel small. Like I'm going to challenge you, I'm going to really push you, and it's not always going to come off as nice, but I will never make you feel small. And if you can meet me there, then whatever we do next is just going to be up to like you being able to stand shoulder to shoulder with me at this thing that we're both trying to accomplish. And you can almost immediately feel some of the kids in the room when they hear that. You can almost like see their body language, their shoulders drop. And I say that to parents too. Before I run any campus, I have a parent meeting and I say that same line to them. I promise that I will give your kids truth with love and I won't make them feel small. And they're all like, it's like a light bulb goes off for them. And like, that's how I think, some of the success that I've had with my shooters has really less to do with me being a great shooting coach and more like instilling in them, like safely instilling in them the audacity of self-belief. Yeah.
And a part of self-belief, you talk about psychological safety, part of self-belief is this belief that I can recover from my mistakes.
Totally. So good.
Right. And that, it's really hard when you're working with someone on shooting and you're kind of experimenting and they're getting so frustrated. I'd always say, you can either get better or you can get frustrated. You got to make a clear choice each time, and that's taking that emotion we're talking about and using it as a driver one way or the other, but having that power to make that choice.
Yeah. And well, I might challenge you on that. Like,
please.
I think it's okay to be frustrated. Like, I think that's coming from a place of care. Like, be frustrated, be mad. Good. Like, I'm glad you're mad. That means you care. What's not okay is to let your frustration dictate your next actions. Be frustrated. That's great. Yeah, I'm frustrated too. Like, let's be frustrated together and tackle this collective goal we're at. Because again, like I think we hinder emotions as coaches naturally because we think it's going to hinder their performance when really like, okay, good, feel it, be mad, go punt a basketball real quick. I've gotten to work out one NBA player ever. So I'm not going to call myself an NBA trainer, but it was just the one time. And in that workout, it was with Al-Farouq Aminu. And we made him start his finisher, which is one of the hardest shooting drills I've ever written. We made him start it over because he kind of just halfway through, like just started half-assing it. And he picked up he was like, start over. Like he just got freaked out and we just let him be mad. He picked up a basketball with his bare hand from the paint and he threw it across the court and it hit the backboard on the other side. I was just staring right at him, like not, saying anything and like showing strength. And inside I was like, oh my God, terrified.
Those are like the freakish things that NBA players do. Like when you're around NBA players, they just do something that's so incredible that that most people can't do, and they just make it look like I'll just do it against the backboard from full floor. It's not a
So
big deal.
yeah, I think athletes get mad because they want to be great, and that's
Yeah.
what it was for Farouk. He wanted to be great so bad, and he let himself down in that moment. And so then he needed to freak out for a minute. He went and he threw up in the trash can in the corner, and then he stepped back up to the baseline to start over. Like,
Yeah.
so I think providing that space for athletes to get emotional is like a huge part of the psychology piece of like the way I train is we push them. I mean, shooting's freaking hard. Like, so we push them. I set really high standards, goals that they have to meet. And when they don't meet them, we do it again. And we keep doing it. Like, this is what shooting is. This is what life is. Like, like you're going to fail over and over again. And do you keep going or don't you?
Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah. And I think I say that, but if you ever came to practice, you'd see guys getting frustrated. And then the question is just like, all right, well, what are we going to do now?
Yeah.
You know, it's not okay to hang on to it. But now you have to respond in a way that's beneficial to you. So maybe that complete statement is a little bit fraudulent because it's not 100%. But I agree. Like I want people that care. I want people that want to get it right.
People don't get frustrated about stuff they don't care about. Like,
right. I mean, no, you're right. No, that's excellent. That's excellent. How did you decide to jump into this side of basketball instead of the coaching side?
Yeah, it all sort of happened really organically. I got that job, as a GA at my alma mater, and about 6 months in, I just realized that there wasn't a priority placed on joy in the gym, and that's a non-negotiable.
All right,
you
got to preach on this. I love joy. I love coaching with happiness. I believe you can love your players, love what you do every single day, and still be a competitive team and go out there and compete at the highest level. So, you're talking to someone who is on the same wavelength.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want you to preach it out right now because joy and finding your joy and finding your love in that game is everything. And I feel like we're pushing against that so much right now in our culture of basketball. So just preach on it because I love it.
Yeah, there's two pieces to it. One is right now the culture, as you mentioned, is the culture of basketball is we are teaching athletes to equate their worth to their wins. And
it's incredibly bad, right?
Yeah. And yeah, this is why we have an epidemic of perfectionism in youth sports. This is why we have people dropping out of youth sports at an alarming rate. Yeah, so that's one piece is like you are more than whether you win this game or make this shot, and like the pressures on coaches don't help. I mean, if coaches don't win, they get fired. It's so that mentality is maybe not purposefully, but it's passed on to the athletes. Like if you don't perform, then that's my ass. And so that's one piece is that's the culture we live in. And so that's the culture that I am very much trying to flip or be a part of flipping. And so as far as, when we talk about joy and happiness in what we're doing, it's very difficult to be really great at anything you don't actually enjoy doing or showing up for. In fact, I think it's nearly impossible unless you're just like born great at something. You can't become great at something you don't enjoy doing. So that's kind of the second piece. But what's interesting is there's tons, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, but there's tons of research in positive psychology on the happiness advantage. So, we're taught as a society, we teach athletes, if you work really hard, you keep grinding, you keep doing it, then you're going to be successful, and then you're going to be happy with that. When really, research has shown hundreds of times that people who prioritize happiness first, both for themselves and for the people that they lead, those are the people who become successful at like a significant rate, like a scientifically significant rate. If you prioritize happiness, success revolves around that, not around hard work. Obviously, hard work is a piece. You can't just like be rainbows and butterflies and like, you know, think it's all going to work out. But people who are happier in their environments work harder in their environments. They go through hard things easier. And, you know, that all of that bundled together creates success. And that's not the culture of coaching. It's not.
Yeah. You know, happiness and the pursuit of happiness and the way that you go about it as a head coach, that environment is everything.
Totally.
And I've watched, I've rebuilt 3 programs basically. And not to say where the happiness quota was before or any of that. I'm not trying to compare, but because we make that a priority, it just changes everything. I mean, we had a game one year we lost in like triple overtime, and it was like a gut wrenching game where we really needed it for our standing. And we came in the next day, and we didn't even do film. We came in the next day. I think we meditated for like 20 minutes, and we brought it together as a group, and then we like. I told some jokes in the center, and then we got out for the day. Right. And, we might have did scouting report or something. We went out the next day, won by like 20, and everyone just thought, oh, like, well, you guys must have had a really tough practice. It was like, no, actually we just laughed about the mistakes that we made and just made a commitment not to do it again. Right. And so I think people get it wrong so often.
Yeah.
They just push. And then, people break.
They do.
They do. Push. Now, it's funny. So you talk about happiness, and so you talk about hard work. Would you consider what you do hard work?
Absolutely.
Because like if you're happy, it's like, hey, like I've seen your videos. I can tell how much joy you have when you're in the gym.
Yeah.
I didn't think. I would say I didn't think that the hardest things to do for me were things that I had to really work at to be good at, but it wasn't like on the floor. It might've been like the marketing of this or, different stuff like that, like there's other parts that go into what you and I are sort of doing now that are a little bit outside our comfort zone. But I think having that joy, and I do think when you have that joy with your athletes, they feel it.
Totally.
It changes everything.
Yeah. Well, one, let me just say, like, I wish I would have had you as a coach, my friend.
You would have made shots. You'd have liked me. We should have won 3, so we'd be very happy.
Yeah, I'm 5'6" and I can't move sideways, so I'd have just stood in the corner, and catch and shoot. But yeah, like, my experience with coaches growing up, both in high school and throughout my college career was not that at all. Like, and I think that's part of why I'm so motivated to never like be that, to never make an athlete feel small, because I was so often made to feel that way in my adolescence as I was growing up through college. And when you're in those really emotional like places of developing, and especially like, I mean, that alone is like, you have these people doing the thing that they care about the most. And how do you make that safe? For them? And I think what you just explained is exactly the way. Like, I hope so many people hear this and hear like that example, because many coaches, like you, even the person who asked you said in that interview, like, oh, you guys must have, ran them and let them know. Like, why is that the norm?
Why is that the expected response?
Yeah, why? It's macho sports guys, sports guys and girls.
Yeah, it's so strange to me. I mean, I just don't think that way. Now, I think there's times where you have to go,
certainly,
to that level, obviously. But I think you use those like very few and far between. Like if you can avoid using that, avoid using it at the deepest level. Because one thing we always talk about is connections are gift. And obviously you don't have connection without vulnerability. We also say love's accountability and accountability is love. So those are like two of our main phrases. And so if we're setting the standard at a level if we're setting the standard with accountability at a certain level, and we love and care about the people that we work with, then we're going to figure everything else out. And it won't always be perfect. Now I will say this, I think a challenge is, and maybe I'll ask you 4 minutes as a question. What do you do when you have an athlete who's used to coming from that sort of like macho environment? And, you know, I'm sure you've had a client that's coming from a macho environment and you're trying to get through to them. Cause I feel like those are the hardest people for me to work with, that are coming in with a preconceived notion of how it should work. How do you work with that client? How do you adjust the mindset?
Yeah. It's funny. It's different between, because I'm thinking of two athletes, one male, one female. So like that's alone is like very different dynamics. With, you know, it's funny, like with the female athlete I'm thinking of right now, what I just, you know, kept pouring love into her, and like until she was convinced like that, all right, this is who I am. And then from there is where I was able to challenge and dig a little bit. Like she was the only athlete I've ever kicked out of a workout, because like she just wasn't bringing it. Like like I'm like showing up, pouring into you. Like I need you to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. Come back tomorrow. You know, I got love for you. It's not because you're a bad person or because you're a bad player, but like you're not here today. So I'll see you tomorrow. And that had to happen only after, you know, lots of patience and love and like all of that. Whereas my male athletes, that I've had that are, you know, macho, have been from macho coaches, and they expect a certain way, they almost don't take me seriously at first. Yeah. So I kind of have to wear a different hat with them. And sometimes I just have to play them one-on-one and let them know. And like, even if I lose, like by playing them hard, like by bumping them in, you know, as a female in this space, by like going hard and just getting a couple buckets, then they're like, oh, okay, like I see you, like I have respect for you now.
You know, I wonder, it makes me think. So I have a good friend, Ashley Merriman. She's an author and speaker, and she speaks a lot about the difference in genders. And I wonder how much of it is female to female, right? Versus male to male. And then when you cross and you're getting that different direction, right? Because I would think, and again, this is not my specialty. If I'm a male coach and if I'm a male player with a former male macho, and now I have a male coach who is the opposite of that, that's a dynamic, versus having a female coach who maybe I expect to be opposite of that.
That's a good point.
Right.
That's a good point.
You know, so I just kind of like, it just makes me think like all these, but that's the beautiful thing about coaching is like, you have to kind of trial and error to kind of figure out.
It's all a puzzle. It's all, people are puzzles, shooters are puzzles. It's all, you know, I think you made it such a good point about like our superpower being connection. Yeah.
Well, you've been amazing with your time. I have a couple questions remaining. Man, I could talk to you for a long time.
Yeah, I could talk to you. I feel that same way.
We got good vibes going here, and just how we see the game. And I just love the energy that you can, you know, you can really tell that you love the game and how you want to teach the game, and you've really studied it. It's great to see. We do this thing on last call. The last question that we always ask. It's the end of the night. It's the last call. So the bell's been rung by the bartender. You've got two people beside you. The one on the left of you is someone who's retired. The one on the right of you is someone who's still active and working. No family. What two people would you want beside you at the end of the night?
The first person that came to mind was Kobe.
Okay. Like it?
For me.
Why Kobe?
Kobe, I think, has an entire piece of his mind that we didn't quite get access to or get to experience. What he was doing for the women's game, you know, he was an Oscar-winning, animations like director. You know, there's so much there that I would have just loved to learn from him, and then I would have loved to have picked his brain on on Mamba mentality in maybe a way that like I don't always agree with, you know, from like a mental health like standpoint, but like how he balanced that, because he clearly was very like emotionally and mentally healthy, and like just to learn like how he navigated that space in such a way. I mean, there's so many things, so many things. So yeah, probably Kobe, as far as people who retired. As far as people now, Dolly Parton.
Ooh, why Dolly?
Dolly is the epitome of grace and forgiveness, and she has some of my favorite, just like, you know, interviews I've seen with her, and like knowing her story, and like, you know, the things, like the way people have wronged her and how she just turns and like just handles things with such grace, is something I really look up to. You know, and I hope to be considered like as somebody who gives people grace like that, who sees good in people, you know, even if they're coming at you sideways in the Instagram comments. That's why. And one of my favorite quotes is a Dollyism, and it's you know, sometimes if you want to get to the rainbow, it's going to take a little bit of rain.
Yeah. Oh man, Dolly. That's a great one. That's a great one. You actually had a combo that no one's had before. So that's a great.
Great.
Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, I'm most active on socials, on Instagram. I dabble in Twitter as well. And you know, I've got a website. Shootersxshoot 70 is my tag that I go by most often. Or yeah, those are my three major networks.
Yeah, I found you on LinkedIn, where I was, you know, just really enjoying the stuff that you're putting out there, and you know, you're doing a great job, and I was fired up to have you on the show, fired up to follow all your success that you have ahead of you. You have friends here at Speakeasy, so if there's anything we can do for you, you know, just don't hesitate to ask.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great. Yeah, I feel very energetically aligned with you. So I agree. I could have sat here for a minute. So yeah, thanks so much for the time.
We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us on The Last Call, powered by Speakeasy, where careers grow through relationships and relationships grow through Speakeasy. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.